the fire that had no name. For 12 years, I guarded things no one was allowed to touch. Sacred bones in silver shrines, crowns whose wearers had long since turned to dust, bowls said to have caught the blood of gods. Some relics sang softly when the moon stood high, others whispered promises the moment you turned your back on them. I believed none of those voices. My duty was not to understand them. I was meant to protect them. The most important of them rested beneath the temple of Vhal Teryn, the Ashen Lantern, a vessel of black glass within which a white flame had burned for nearly 900 years. It gave off no heat, required no oil, and cast shadows that sometimes moved against the light. The priests called it the final breath of the fire god. Pilgrims traveled through the mountains for weeks just to kneel before it. I called it my greatest problem. My name is Khaevran. I was 38 years old, the son of a hellhound Demi and a human blacksmith, and I possessed precisely the kind of appearance devout people were reluctant to see in a guardian of sacred objects. 2 backward-curving horns rose from my dark hair. Black fur covered my forearms, the back of my neck, and a narrow strip along my spine. My hands ended in powerful claws, which I trimmed regularly so they would not interfere when I opened ancient locks. Behind me moved a long ash-gray tail that betrayed my mood whenever I failed to control it. Hellfire smoldered beneath my skin. It was no ordinary flame. I could neither set wood alight with it nor warm a bowl of soup. It devoured magic. Warding circles, curses, and summoned creatures crumbled into grey ash beneath my fire. That was why they had brought me to Vhal Teryn. That was why I was allowed into the lowest chambers, while even the highest priests were forced to wait outside. And that was why I had convinced myself that being needed was the same as belonging. On the night Elyrian Sorel entered the temple, the rain fell so hard that water streamed in silver threads from the stone gargoyles. I noticed him before the gatekeepers demanded his name, not because of any unusual scent or suspicious sound. He was arguing with them. "I have a permit sealed by the High Archive." "The seal is damaged," one of the guards said. "It was transported across a mountain pass during a storm." "Of course, it is damaged." "Then we require confirmation." "The nearest High Archive is 6 days away." "Then you should hurry." When I entered the great hall, a slender man in a dark green traveling coat stood before the guards. He was probably in his early 30s, wore his brown hair tied at the nape of his neck, and held a leather document case before him like a weapon. Beside his boots stood 2 narrow chests from which metal rods, glass tubes, and folded maps protruded. He looked at me without recoiling from my horns. That alone was rare enough to make me suspicious. "You are the relic guardian," he stated. "One of them. The only one with access to the Ashen Lantern. You are remarkably bad at making yourself seem less suspicious." His mouth tightened. "Elyrian Sorel, resonance cartographer in the service of the High Archive of Merovar." I took the document case from him. The seal was genuine. So was the tear along its edge. Resonance cartographers studied magical currents, mapped invisible lines of power, and calculated when ancient spells were becoming unstable. It was a respected profession, though not one known for producing modest men. "Why are you here?" I asked. "The Ashen Lantern is changing its frequency." "It is burning?" "That is not a resonance analysis, but it is an accurate observation." Elyrian exhaled slowly. 3 measuring stations in the eastern mountains have recorded the same deviation over the past 2 months. Something is drawing arcane energy toward Vhal Teryn. Either the lantern is damaged, or someone is using it. Behind me, the guards murmured a prayer. I returned Elyrian's papers. You may work in the upper archive. The lower chambers remain locked. My investigation would be considerably more useful down there. Life is full of disappointments. His gaze lingered on me for a moment. Not with admiration, not with fear, more as though I were a door whose mechanism he intended to understand. Then I suppose I will have to learn how to get along with you, he said. I doubt that. Over the following days, Elyrian proved himself to be as persistent as he was irritating. He placed measuring rods throughout the corridors, stretched hair-thin silver wires between pillars, and filled page after page with columns of numbers. He asked about every reconstruction, every earthquake, and every priest who had entered the relic chambers during the past 50 years. I answered as briefly as possible. Has the lantern ever been moved? Yes. When? 62 years ago. Why? The ceiling collapsed. And where did they take it? Beneath a ceiling that did not collapse. He lowered his pen. Have you always spoken like this? Only to people who ask too many questions. Then your childhood must have been very quiet. He struck closer to the truth than he realized. I had grown up in a border settlement where my mother protected my father's forge from demons, and my father pretended not to be bothered when the neighbors made protective signs at the sight of us. My younger brother Resin and I had learned early that our abilities were welcome as long as we used them for the benefit of others. When I was 20, we guarded a small shrine in the marshlands together. Raiders broke in. I chased one of them instead of staying with my brother. When I returned, the shrine was empty, and Resin was dead. They told me it had not been my fault. They said it so often that I understood how deeply they doubted it themselves. I had never abandoned my post again. Elyrian learned none of this. Even so, he began to treat my boundaries differently. He stopped bothering me with questions during my night watches. Instead, he sometimes stood against the opposite wall and worked silently on his maps. One evening, he brought 2 cups of spiced juniper brew. Bribery? I asked. A peace offering? For what? My personality. I took the cup. We sat on the steps before the inner sanctuary. Behind the bronze door, the ashen lantern burned, invisible yet present as a faint pressure in my horns. Why resonance cartography? I asked. Elyrian turned the cup between his hands. My father made bells, large temple bells, small funeral bells, even those tiny brass bells fishermen fastened to their boats. He said every metal had a voice. If the casting was flawed, the bell lied with every strike. And you wanted to become a bell maker? No, I hated the workshop. Too loud, too hot, and metal dust everywhere. He smiled faintly. But I liked the idea that things possessed a truth that did not depend on what people said about them. Relics mainly possess stories. Stories can be lies. So can measurements, if the person taking them has already decided what he intends to find. His smile vanished. You think I am biased? I think everyone is biased. Including yourself? I gave him no answer. On the 7th day, Elyrian discovered the hidden conduit. It ran behind a mosaic wall in the western passage, thin as a root and made from a metal mentioned in none of the building plans. The conduit drew arcane power from the lower chambers and carried it upward, not into the temple, but out through the mountain. Someone installed it later, Elyrian said, kneeling before the opened wall. No more than 20 years ago. The masonry is older. The conduit was pushed through existing cavities. I touched the dark metal. Something inside it jerked against my claw. My hellfire answered beneath my skin. It is active. Then we need to follow it and see where it leads. We report it to the high priest. Elyrian stood. And what if he knows about it? My tail struck hard against my boot. Choose your next words carefully. The conduit begins only a few steps from the temple's holiest relic. It has been hidden for years and passes through areas accessible only to priests and guardians. I am not saying the high priest is responsible. I am saying we do not know whom we can trust. You are asking me to violate my duty. I am asking you to decide whom your duty belongs to, the temple or the truth. I did not seize him. I did not threaten him. Even so, dark fire rose over my fingers, and the shadows in the passage recoiled from me. Elyrian stood his ground, though his voice became quieter. You are not angry because I am wrong, he said. You are angry because you have been avoiding the same question for a long time. I left before I said something I would regret. That night, I sat alone before the ashen lantern. The vessel rested on a pedestal of white stone. The flame inside it moved despite the absence of wind in the chamber. I had seen it 1,000 times. Yet now I noticed how it contracted with every pulse of the hidden conduit. Not like divine fire, like something in pain. Hellhounds could not smell lies, as some legends claimed, but we could sense bound magic. Every chain possessed an echo, and that echo now lay clearly before me. The lantern was not a vessel for a sacred flame. It was a cage. In the morning I found Elyrian in the archive. He was asleep over his maps, his cheek pressed against a stack of records. A half-eaten apple stood beside his head. I knocked against the table. He jerked awake. I was awake? Of course. Did you wake me solely to insult me? The conduit leads through the northern wall. An old supply tunnel begins there. His face became serious. You want to follow it? I want answers. That almost sounds as though you listened to me. Do not get used to it. The tunnel led deep into the mountain. I walked ahead because I could see better in the darkness and because my claws found purchase on the wet stone. Elyrian followed with a floating sphere of light and a measuring instrument whose needle grew increasingly erratic. Along the way, we argued twice about the correct route, and once about whether a resonance cartographer ought to recognize that a bridge was rotten before stepping onto it. My work concerns invisible lines of power, Elyrian said after we had been forced to take a detour. The missing planks were visible, not from my angle. You were standing in front of them. Not from my intellectual angle. I laughed. It was only a short, rough sound, but Elyrian stopped walking. So you can laugh. Tell no one. I could write a study on the phenomenon. Then I will leave you in the mountain. We reached a vast cavern beneath the temple. At its center stood a machine of gears, crystal discs, and golden arches. The conduit from the relic chamber emptied into its core. From there, the stolen energy spread into more shafts, probably leading to distant temple complexes. Elyrian moved closer. They are storing the power. For what? Not merely for protective barriers. He pointed toward rows of small glass cylinders. A white spark floated inside each one. That could power weapons, siege magic, perhaps entire armies. Applause sounded behind us. High Priest Morith stepped from a side passage. 4 temple guards accompanied him, men with whom I had eaten, trained, and stood watch for years. "I had hoped you would be more reasonable, Khaevran," Morith said. "You exploited the lantern." "We made use of its gift." "It is not a gift." The High Priest looked toward the machine. "The being inside the lantern is a remnant from an age when fire spirits destroyed entire cities. It possesses no human soul." Elyrian stepped beside me. How convenient to deny the soul of the prisoner. Morith's face hardened. "The cartographer has confused you. Step aside. Your years of service will not be forgotten." Once that promise would have been enough, not because of ambition, but because of fear. Without my service, I was merely a hellhound with a past I could not change. Elyrian did not look at me. He asked nothing of me. He left the decision to me. I thought of Resan, not of his death, but of his laughter whenever he claimed that one day I would have to learn to want something that had nothing to do with guarding. "No," I said. Morith raised his hand. The machine awakened. Magical chains shot across the ground. I did not shove Elyrian away or throw myself heroically in front of him. We had planned our retreat. He shattered a crystal capsule he had concealed in his coat, and a piercing resonance tone sent the first chain lashing sideways. I unleashed my hellfire. Black flames streamed over my arms and devoured the spellwork of the machine. Elyrian ran toward the control arches and twisted the embedded discs. The guards attacked us, but they were not enemies I wanted to kill. I knocked weapons from hands, tore warding sigils from armor, and forced them back. Then the flame inside the lantern screamed. The sound came through the entire mountain. Stones splintered. The machine had begun to drain the prisoner completely. "Khaevran!" Elyrian shouted. "I cannot stop the process. The connection has to be severed at the source." "Then we go back. The tunnel will collapse. Do you know a better way?" It was the first time I had spoken to him so familiarly. He noticed, even then. "No," he said, "but I will find one." We did not run back to the temple. Instead, Elyrian redirected the power into the old bell shafts above the cavern. The conduits had never been designed for it. Metal shrieked. The golden arches began to melt. I understood his plan. "You want to reverse the resonance." "The lantern is bound through vibration. If the mountain answers at the same frequency, the cage breaks. Or half the temple does." "You are remarkably bad at mentioning the reassuring possibility first." I placed myself at the center of the machine and allowed my fire to pour into the conduits. It consumed the binding magic while Elyrian aligned the frequency. Every bone in my body vibrated. My knees nearly buckled. "No!" he shouted. The bells of Vhal Teryn rang, not through ropes or hands. The entire mountain made them sound. Their voice rolled through the stone like a storm. Far above us, black glass shattered. The white flame raced through the conduits, burst into the cavern, and rose over the machine. For a moment I saw within it the figure of a man made from bright fire, tall and slender, with a face that was neither young nor old. He looked at me. Then he touched my forehead with 2 burning fingers. No words, only a feeling of immeasurable relief. The flame dissolved into 1,000 sparks that streamed through the cracks in the cavern roof and out into the world. The machine fell silent. Morith sank to the floor. Later, envoys arrived from Merovar. Before our exploration, Elyrian had sent copies of his records to 3 independent archives. Distrust was one of his flaws, but this time it prevented the temple from concealing everything. Morith and several priests were arrested. All that remained of the Ashen Lantern were shards of glass. Many pilgrims called me a traitor. Others declared me a liberator. Both felt wrong. For weeks I helped examine the remaining relics. Some truly were sacred. Others were stolen artifacts, prisons, or clever forgeries. Elyrian stayed. We worked, argued, and ate together. He regularly forgot to take breaks. I would place a plate beside his maps without a word. I tended to make decisions alone. He reminded me that consideration was not weakness. One evening we sat on the temple roof. Lights burned in the valley below us. The bells had remained silent since that night. "What will you do?" Elyrian asked. "The High Archive has offered me a position, Guardian of Recovered Artifacts." "That sounds familiar." "This time, I am allowed to decide what deserves protection." He nodded, though something in his expression remained tense. "And you?" "I am supposed to lead the new investigations, travel, inspect ancient temples, write reports, probably anger a great many people." "You possess an exceptional talent for that." "Thank you." The silence between us was not uncomfortable. Even so, I sensed that something remained unsaid. "You could come with me," he said at last. "Not as my guardian, not as someone I need to break open doors. As—" He fell silent. "As what?" I am trying not to say it wrong. "That is new?" "Khaevran." I turned toward him. Over the past weeks, I had learned to recognize his uncertainty in the pauses between his words. Elyrian could speak before priests, judges, and armed guards without hesitation. Yet now he fought for every sentence. "As someone whose company I would miss," he said, "more than is probably reasonable." My tail settled on the stone between us, not around him, only close enough for him to see the movement. "You are arrogant," I said. "I know. You conceal things when you believe the result justifies it. I am working on that. You walk across rotten bridges. That happened once. And you talk about measurements in your sleep." He stared at me. "How do you know that? I have good ears?" "That does not answer my question." I smiled. "I would miss you too." The kiss did not happen suddenly. Elyrian raised one hand, but stopped before touching me. I closed the distance myself. My forehead rested against his, carefully because of my horns. We remained like that for a single breath, as though giving each other the chance to withdraw. Neither of us did. His lips met mine gently and without haste. No oath, no claim, no burst of divine magic, only an honest kiss above the rooftops of a temple that was beginning to learn that truth could be holier than tradition. When we drew apart, Elyrian seemed unusually speechless. "No analysis?" I asked. "I require further measurements." "Outrageous." "Thorough research is important." I kissed him a second time so that he would have sufficient data. 3 months later, we left Vhal Teryn. I wore no temple insignia. Keys to empty cages that would never be used again hung from my belt. Illyrian's maps filled 2 saddlebags, though he insisted that he had packed only the essentials. Our first assignment took us to a sunken sanctuary in the south. Supposedly the tears of a sea goddess were kept there. Elyrian suspected a bound water source. I suspected we would end up with wet boots. We argued about the route on the first day. On the second, we shared bread beneath an old stone bridge. On the third, I told him about Ressen. Elyrian did not say that it had not been my fault. He knew me well enough to understand that those words healed nothing. Instead, he listened until I had spoken everything I had kept silent for 12 years. Then he asked, "What would your brother have thought about you traveling the world with a brilliant resonance cartographer?" "He would have found you unbearable." That was not the answer I had hoped for. "He would have liked you." Elyrian smiled and handed me the last piece of bread. Ahead of us, the road wound through a land full of false sanctuaries, dangerous wonders, and things that had been guarded for far too long. For the first time in my life, I had no fixed post. I had no stone walls, no prescribed prayers, and no duty behind which I could hide. I had a road. I had a choice of my own. And beside me walked a man who did not expect me to save him, obey him, or belong to him. He only wanted me to stay for as long as I chose to stay. For a hellhound who had spent his entire life guarding cages, freedom was frightening at first. But when Elyrian held his hand open between us, I placed mine in it. Not from duty, not from guilt, but because I had finally learned that protecting something did not mean holding it captive. Sometimes it meant opening a door together and walking through it.